I genuinely dislike reading books. It's never something that I was really interested in, or it was never something that I looked forward. But I've been able to pull off something that I don't believe. It's crazy. In 7 days, I've been able to build a reading habit. Not only have I built a reading habit, most importantly, I've built a reading habit that I enjoy, that I look forward to. Now you might be asking, Abhishek, anybody can read for 7 days and say I built a reading habit. How do you know it worked? So it's been 3 weeks since I finished that 7 day challenge. Since I started reading, it's been about 4 weeks, and I still read every day. And it's something that I still enjoy. This video will be really valuable to you if you're someone who genuinely dislike reading books but still want to build a reading habit and learn to enjoy reading. Or this video is for someone who used to read before but just fell out of the habit and never got back to reading books. Or this video is also valuable to those people out there who wants to start reading, who wants to build a reading habit but don't know how to go about it. Now, when I decided that I wanted to get back to reading, I used to read before, by the way, full disclosure, but then I kind of started to dislike it. Then I went around asking readers and non-readers about how they felt about reading. There are two observations that I was able to make out of it. One, both of them really liked to read, but the readers had built a solid reading habit that helped them to read constantly. Whereas people who did not read, they wanted to read, but they just could not get to it. They got something wrong that made them dislike reading books. Second observation that I was able to make was both the groups disliked reading at some point or the other. But the people who continued to read books, they were someone who were able to get over that being bored with a book stage, and were able to actually continue their reading habit. But the people who did not read, majority of them, many of them who had tried reading before, they actually quit when things got boring. That is one thing that even I did. So how do we go about it? How do you become a reader? How do you build a reading habit that you enjoy? Let's see that now. So I'm not going to be diving into benefits of reading. You can look into it, and one interesting thing that you'll find is there is a study out there which shows how reading every day can actually increase your lifespan for about 2 years or something. Really interesting stuff. So I'm going to be dividing this video into two parts. First one is how I built the reading habit, and the second part I'm going to be telling you guys on what you need to keep in mind when you are doing this. So there are 3 things that I did to help me build a reading habit in 7 days very quickly. The first thing that I did was to pick the right book. So see, picking a right book is important, because if you start off with a book that you're not really excited about or you're not interested in, very soon you will hate reading it. In fact, you'll connect it with the reading habit itself, and you're going to end up hating reading altogether. So how do you pick a right book? First one is relevancy. When you're picking a book, it's good to pick a book that's relevant to your field, your career, or your life, or whatever you're doing. Reason is, as you're reading the book, you can relate it with your life experience, and that will make reading and learning even more enjoyable. So if you're an engineer, if you're a coder, you can read a book about coding instead of reading some book about thermodynamics or something that you have no interest whatsoever in, or it's not even relevant to you. Second way to pick the right book is based on interest. Now, career is not something that we all have our majority interest only in. We are also interested in many other things. So picking a book that you're interested in is another way you could do it. However, here's something that you need to understand. You might have a lot of interests, but the amount of interest that you have in each of those is different. So one way to do, if you're confused about which interest area to find a book in, list down 3 or 4 of your interests, rate them from 1 to 10. If your interest is above 8, then I would say consider reading a book about it. Okay, so that's the second way to do it. Third way to do it is very solution oriented approach, which is, if you have a problem that you really want to solve, then pick a book about it. For example, people pick a book on public speaking. Very specific, very reason oriented. So they pick a book so that they could improve their public speaking. Here also you can do the rating system. You can pick around 3 to 5 problems that you have, or 3 to 5 challenges that you have, and rate how badly do you want to find solution to it out of 1 to 10. If it's around 6 and above, then I would say consider reading a book about it. So second thing that I did that helped me build a reading habit is to prioritize and remove distractions. You would have heard the saying, right? Out of sight, out of mind. And it's a very common thing. Your brain can only, or your mind can only keep track of few things very consciously. After I think around 3 to 5, you can't keep track of many other things. You just forget it. So what you need to do is just, you can put it in your to-do list. You can write down on your hand that you need to read a book today, or something that will remind you to read a book. You can even ask a friend to remind you. Now, other thing that you could do in this step is to actually keep the book in front of you, near you, so that it's always there in your vision. So as soon as you see it, you're more likely to pick it up if you actually see it. Second thing is to actually remove distractions. See, many people read ebooks, and I tried reading books on my phone. The problem was I kept getting messages, or I kept getting notifications from apps, and when I went to check it out, I would completely forget about reading the book and I would get distracted. So one thing that I did for this challenge was to keep my phone away, or keep my phone in airplane mode, but keep it away where I won't be able to touch it. Maybe in the next room, or maybe so far from me that I'll feel lazy to go walk and just pick up the phone. So you can use a physical book to read so that notifications won't bother you, or you can keep another device just for reading your books or learning. Third step is one of the most important step, which is actually using some techniques to build a habit that will last for a long time. So one thing that I did to build this habit was use this technique called as minimum viable work. This is the technique that I learned in the book called Atomic Habits, and it's a very, very powerful tip. What you basically do in this tip, or in this technique, is you set a minimum amount of work that you have to do to say, you know what, I did the habit today. So if it's reading books, you can set up a minimum thing that you have to do to say, you know what, I read today. It has to be so minimum, so easy that 99% of the time you should be able to do it. If I'm not able to read a chapter, or if I'm not able to read a few paragraphs or few pages that day, my minimum was to read one line, one simple line. Many people try to set big goals. I want to, read one book a month, or one book a week. And it's so crazy that maybe for the first few days they read a lot, and then they completely give up. So this technique is an antidote to that. So set up minimum viable work. The goal here is not to read a lot. It's to build this habit of you sitting down and reading. That's all. So the second technique that I used is to actually use my willpower to do the reading. All these techniques will make you read very easily, but still you need to keep going. So after doing these three things, I started to notice something different. In fact, from around 4th day, I actually wanted to get down to read. It's not something that I really thought about. I just picked up the book and I started to read. Now, one of the ways to remove your thinking, or remove excuses, or remove likes and dislikes, is to actually build a habit, so that you don't really think too much about it consciously. You just do it automatically. So this is something that started to happen on around day 4th. So day 6th, I was really exhausted. I did not want to read a book. And you know what? I actually went and slept, but I couldn't sleep. It's like, you know what, when you have to do something but you haven't done something, you just can't stop thinking about it. I switched on the light and I said, you know what, I promised myself that I would read one line. So I took out the book, I read one line, and then I actually felt more active. I thought, you know what, maybe I'll read a few more lines, and I actually read a whole page, and then I went down to sleep. So you will start noticing the same benefits as well. In fact, you'll notice a significant benefit, or you'll actually notice that you would want to read in at around 2 weeks mark. But this challenge is for 7 days, so we're doing it for 7 days. So what should you keep in mind before doing it? The first thing you need to keep in mind is that it's okay to change books. Not all books are interesting. Okay, maybe in that book you are only interested in one or two topics. It's okay to read those two topics and change. In fact, one technique that I used when I was building a reading habit was one day I skipped the book entirely. I actually went and read the blog because I was really bored and I really did not want to read a book that day. So doing this, you will make sure that you actually are building a habit of reading, not just simply trying to finish one book, but in long term you will actually end up reading a lot more. So second thing that you need to keep in mind is, don't change your books way too much. A lot of times, what I learned from my previous attempts trying to build a reading habit was that, like everything in life, a book also has good parts and bad parts. And you need to get through these bad parts to get to those good parts. Otherwise, the good part of the book won't make sense to you. For example, if you're reading a fiction, if you skip the boring part that actually tells you about characters or character development and all those things, when you get to the interesting part, you actually won't understand. It's like watching the climax of a movie without the setup. So third thing that you need to keep in mind, this is a very sneaky technique that will get you to actually read more. If you can get a tab just to read, or if you can get a device just to read a book, there's something called as free flow mode. You can do it on the phone as well. In free flow mode, the app will not show you how many pages you've read. It'll actually show you once you have come to the end of the chapter. Sometimes maybe there might be a page depending on the way the file is created, but many books, when I put in free flow mode, I could not see the page numbers. So a lot of times when I was actually wanting to read a chapter or read a page, actually I ended up reading 2 to 3 pages. You won't even feel that. You'll just keep going and going and going. So in that way you could read a lot more than you actually think you wanted to read. With that said, guys, if you felt like these were practical, if you felt like these are some things that you could apply to build a reading habit, then leave a like and hit that subscribe button, because the next video is going to be even more relevant to you, because I'll be teaching you how I doubled my reading speed in 7 days so that you can read more in less time. With that said, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.